53 scratches on a wooden beam. That's how Clara Mae Whitfield measured her life now. One mark for each sunrise she never saw. One mark for each night her own father walked past the locked door and pretended he couldn't hear her breathing. She stopped screaming on day 12. Not because she gave up, because she realized no one was coming. This channel tells stories of the American West, where love outlasts betrayal, where strangers become family, and where one locked door changed everything. Subscribe now, watch until the end, and comment your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Clara's fingernail was bleeding again. She pressed her thumb against the raw edge where the nail had cracked and kept scratching anyway. The wooden beam above her head now held 53 marks. 53 days since her father had shoved her into the old grain barn and turned the iron key. She heard his boots outside, that familiar drag of his left leg across the dirt. The war had given him that limp. The whiskey had given him everything else. The door didn't open. It never did during daylight anymore. He only came at night now when the dark outside matched the dark inside. Clara pressed her back against the wall and waited. The footsteps stopped. "You ready to sign yet?" His voice was thick. Afternoon drunk, not morning drunk. She knew the difference by now. "No." "Clara Mae." He said her name like it was a curse. "Your mama's been dead 5 years. That water ain't doing her no good in the ground. Sign the paper and this all goes away." "Mama left those rights to me." "Your mama left them to this family. I am this family." Clara stared at the thin line of light beneath the door. She could see his shadow. One boot, then the other. "You gonna let me die in here?" Silence. "Pa, you ain't gonna die." His voice had changed. Softer. Almost the voice she remembered from before. "You're just gonna sit there until you remember who raised you and what you owe." "I don't owe you Mama's water." Something hit the door hard. His fist maybe, or his bottle. 53 days, girl. You could have been sleeping in your own bed this whole time. You could have been eating at a proper table. All you had to do was sign one piece of paper. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "I signed the land deed. I gave you the 40 acres. The land ain't worth nothing without the water, and you know it." His shadow shifted. "I got debts, Clara. Men who don't wait. Men who don't care that my daughter is stubborn as a mule. You want me dead? Is that what this is? I want you to open the door. Then sign." "No." The shadow disappeared. His footsteps faded toward the house. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at the beam above her. 53 marks. Her mother had kept a journal. Every bruise, every broken promise. Every night Silas came home with whiskey on his breath and war in his eyes. Emmeline Whitfield had written it all down and hidden it beneath the floorboards of Clara's bedroom. Clara had found it 3 years ago. She had read every word, and she had memorized the location of every document her mother had ever filed. The water rights were in Clara's name. Her mother had made sure of that before she died, and Clara would rot in this barn before she let her father take them. She scratched the 53rd mark a little deeper into the wood. 7 miles east, Ezra Holloway was mending a fence that didn't need mending. He did that sometimes. Found work that kept his hands busy when his mind wouldn't stop. 3 years since Louisa passed, and he still couldn't sleep past 4 in the morning. The empty side of the bed felt louder in the dark. The fence post was solid. The wire was tight. But Ezra kept checking anyway, running his rough hands over the wood like he was looking for something that wasn't there. "You planning to rebuild the whole thing?" Ezra turned. Harriet Brennan was riding up the dirt road, her gray hair pinned back under a practical bonnet. She ran the general store in Dry Creek, had for 20 years. Nothing happened in this town without Hattie knowing about it first. "Morning, Hattie. It's past noon." Ezra looked at the sun. She was right. Hattie pulled her horse to a stop and looked at him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I need you to do something for me." "What kind of something?" "The kind that might get you shot." Ezra set down his tools. "You got my attention." Hattie's face was serious, more serious than he'd ever seen it. "You know Silas Whitfield got that place out past Miller's Creek?" "I know of him. His wife brought me soup once after Louisa died. Good woman. Heard she passed a few years back." "She did. Left everything to her daughter Clara. The land, the water rights on the underground spring. Most valuable claim in 50 miles. Ezra waited. Hattie wasn't the type to waste words. "Silas has been telling folks Clara's sick. Says she's got melancholy so bad she can't leave her room. First time I heard it, I believed him. Second time I wondered. Third time." Hattie's jaw tightened. "I rode out there myself. Asked to see her. Silas stood in the doorway and told me she wasn't fit for visitors." Could be true. Could be. Except I've known that girl since she was born. Emmeline was my closest friend. Clara doesn't have melancholy. She has a spine made of iron and a father who can't break it. Ezra felt something cold settle in his gut. "What are you asking me to do, Hattie?" "Ride out there, look around. If everything's fine, I'll give you a month's worth of supplies for free. But if it ain't..." She met his eyes. "You're not the kind of man who can walk away. I know that about you. You don't know that. I know you haven't forgiven yourself for Sarah Dawson." Ezra's whole body went still. "That's not the same." "It's exactly the same. You saw her husband hit her outside the feed store. You told yourself it wasn't your business. 2 months later, she was dead." Hattie's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. "You've been carrying that ever since. I'm giving you a chance to put it down." Ezra stared at the fence post. His hands were still. "I barely know Silas Whitfield. You don't need to know him. You just need to check on his daughter. And if he don't want me checking..." Hattie's smile was thin. "Then I reckon we'll know I was right to send you." She turned her horse and started back toward town. Over her shoulder she called out, "Take the creek path. Silas watches the main road." Ezra stood there for a long moment looking at the fence he didn't need to fix. Then he walked to the barn and saddled his horse. The Whitfield place looked like a farm that had given up. Ezra pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the property and studied it. Fences falling down. Garden choked with weeds. The house itself was still standing but barely. Paint peeling. Shutters hanging loose. No sign of life except a thin trail of smoke from the chimney. He was about to turn back when he heard it. A sound, low and muffled, coming from somewhere behind the house. Ezra swung down from his saddle and moved quiet the way you move when you don't want to be heard. His boots barely touched the ground. The sound came again. Not an animal. Human. He rounded the corner of the house and saw it. An old grain barn, door heavy and reinforced. And on that door, a padlock the size of a man's fist. A padlock on a barn wasn't unusual. A padlock on a barn with no grain inside, that was something else entirely. Ezra knelt by the door. "Hello." Silence. Then a shuffle from inside. A voice dry as dust. "Who's there?" "Name's Ezra Holloway. I'm a neighbor. Hattie Brennan sent me to check on Clara Whitfield." Another long pause. "Hattie sent you?" "Yes, ma'am." He heard a sound that might have been a sob, might have been a laugh, hard to tell. "My father will be back before sundown. The key is in the house. Kitchen. There's a nail above the stove. He thinks I don't know." Ezra didn't hesitate. He walked to the kitchen door, found it unlocked, and saw the key exactly where she said it would be. His hand didn't shake when he picked it up. He walked back, slid the key into the padlock and turned. The lock cracked open like a bone breaking. He lifted the door. The smell hit him first. Stale air, unwashed skin, fear. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the dirt floor, her back against the far wall. Her dress was torn and filthy, probably the same one she'd been wearing when he put her in here. Her wrists were raw, marked with rope burns that had scabbed over and opened again. But her eyes were clear. That's what Ezra would remember later. Everything else about her looked broken, but not her eyes. "How long?" he asked. 53 days. The words hung in the air between them. "Can you stand?" Clara got to her feet without help. She caught herself on the wall once, but she didn't fall. Ezra understood then. She had refused to be weak. Whatever her father had tried to take from her, he hadn't gotten this. He offered his hand. She looked at it for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "I need to tell you something," Clara said as she stepped into the sunlight, blinking hard against the brightness. "Before we go, before anything else. I'm listening. My father made me sign over my mother's land. He kept me in the dark and told me I'd stay there until I did. I signed on day 12. Ezra nodded slowly. "But I didn't sign the water rights. That's why he kept me down there 41 more days. And that's why he'll come after me." The water rights. My mother filed them separate from the land deed. They're in my name. They control the irrigation for every ranch downstream, including Judge Prescott's property. Clara's voice was steady as stone. "My father doesn't just want to pay off his gambling debts. He wants power over the very men who could rule against him in court." Ezra let that sink in. "So when he finds out you're gone, he'll have a story ready. He'll tell everyone I'm unstable, that you kidnapped me, that I'm not fit to own property." Clara looked at him with those clear, sharp eyes. "He's been planning this for years, Mr. Holloway. I'm the only thing standing between him and everything he wants." "Then we'd better get you somewhere safe." He helped her onto his horse. She was light, too light, but she held herself straight. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My ranch. It's 7 miles east. You'll stay in the house. I'll sleep in the barn." "You don't have to." "I know I don't." He softened his voice just slightly. "But that's how it's going to be. There's a lock on the bedroom door, keys on the dresser. It locks from the inside." Something changed in her face then. A flicker of something he couldn't name. She was looking at him like she was seeing something unexpected. "You thought about what I'd need," she said quietly, "before I even had to ask." Ezra didn't answer. He just started walking, leading the horse by the reins. Behind them, the barn door swung in the hot summer wind. The 53 marks Clara had scratched into the beam would stay there for years, but she would never count another day again. They rode in silence for the first mile. Clara held onto the saddle horn with both hands, her body stiff against Ezra's back. He could feel her flinch every time the horse stepped over a rock or a root. 53 days in a dark barn had taken more from her than she wanted to admit. "You knew my mother," she said finally. "Not well. She brought me soup after my wife passed, sat on my porch for an hour, and didn't say a thing. Best conversation I had that whole year." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like her." "She was a good woman. She was the strongest woman I ever knew." Clara's voice caught just for a second. "She stayed with my father because she believed people could change. She was wrong about that. But she was right about one thing. Land is the only thing a woman can own that a man can't charm away from her. That's why she filed those water rights in her own name. That's why she made sure they'd pass to me." Ezra didn't respond. There was nothing to say. "My father will be home by now," Clara continued. "He'll find the barn empty. He'll drink first, he always drinks first. But by morning, he'll have a story ready. One that makes him the grieving father, and me the troubled daughter. Half of Dry Creek will believe him by noon. You know him well. I've had 53 days to study him." They reached Ezra's ranch as the sun was getting low. It wasn't much a small house, a solid barn fences he kept in better repair than Silas had ever managed. But it was his. He had built it with his own hands after Louisa died. Something to do when grief got too heavy. He helped Clara down from the horse and drew water from the well. "Drink slow," he said. "Your stomach won't take much at first." She drank. Slow, like he told her. "There's food inside. Bread, salt, pork, some preserves my wife put up." He paused. "I hadn't been able to open them until now." Clara looked at him. Really looked. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Holloway?" "Ezra." "Why are you doing this, Ezra?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I didn't help someone once before," he said finally. "And she ended up buried in a field with no marker." Clara didn't ask for more. She understood. "My mother kept a journal," she said, her voice dropping low. "Every threat, every bruise. She hid it under the floorboards in my room. I found it 3 years ago when I started seeing what he was becoming. I knew this day would come." "You were preparing." "My mother taught me to hope for the best and prepare for a man at his worst." The sun was nearly gone now. Shadows stretched long across the yard. "First thing tomorrow," Ezra said, "I'll ride into town and talk to Hattie. Then we'll figure out what to do about your father. He has the sheriff in his pocket." "I know. He has gambling debts with half the men in town." "I know that too." Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then why do you think anyone will help?" Ezra looked at her. This girl, who had spent 53 days in darkness and come out with her spine still straight. This girl who had memorized her father's debts through the walls of a locked barn. This girl who carried her mother's journal in her memory like a weapon. "Because you're not asking for help," he said. "You're asking for justice. And there's still a few people in this town who know the difference." Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since he'd opened that barn door, she let her shoulders drop. Not in defeat, in exhaustion. The kind that comes when you finally stop running. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I know how to survive him. I don't know how to fight him." "You don't have to know yet." Ezra gestured toward the house. "Tonight you eat, you sleep, you lock that door from the inside. Tomorrow we start." She walked to the porch, then stopped at the door. "Ezra?" "Yeah." "For 53 days, I told myself someone would come, and every night I told myself I was a fool for hoping." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I wasn't a fool." She went inside. He heard the lock turn from within. Ezra stood on the porch as the stars came out one by one. Somewhere out there, Silas Whitfield was staring into an empty barn and planning his next move. The whole county was about to learn what happened when a man pushed his daughter past the breaking point. And Ezra Holloway was standing right in the middle of it. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster she didn't recognize. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't know where she was. Her body braced for the darkness, for the dirt floor, for the scratch of her own fingernail against wood. Then, she felt the mattress beneath her. The clean sheets. The weight of a real blanket. She sat up fast, her heart pounding. The lock on the door was still turned. The key was still on the dresser where Ezra had said it would be. She was safe. The word felt strange in her mind. Foreign. Like a language she had forgotten how to speak. A knock on the door made her flinch. "Miss Whitfield." Ezra's voice low and careful. "I made coffee. There's biscuits too if you're hungry." Clara's stomach clenched. Real food. Not hardtack. Not jerky that tasted like leather. "I'll be out in a minute." She heard his footsteps move away from the door. She stood up slowly, testing her legs. They held. That was something. When she came out of the bedroom, Ezra was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 tin cups of coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept. She wondered if he ever did. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I've been locked in a barn for 53 days. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." She sat across from him and wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth felt like a miracle, What happens now? I ride into town, talk to Hattie. She'll know who we can trust. There's not many. There's enough. Ezra pushed a plate of biscuits toward her. Eat slow. Your stomach's gonna fight you. Clara took a small bite. Her body wanted to devour everything in sight, but she forced herself to chew to wait to breathe. My father will have a story ready by now, she said between bites. He's probably already in town telling everyone I ran off with some stranger, that I'm not right in the head. Let him talk. You don't understand. Clara set down the biscuit. He's been planning this for years. He knows every man who owes him money, every woman who owes him a favor. He's been building his version of the truth since before he locked that door. Ezra met her eyes. Then we'd better start building ours. He stood up and grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. I'll be back before noon. Ezra. He stopped. Be careful. My father doesn't fight fair. Neither do I, ma'am. Not anymore. He was gone before she could respond. Clara sat alone at the table listening to the sound of his horse fading into the distance. For the first time in 53 days, she had a choice. She could sit here and wait for someone else to save her. Or she could fight. She looked at the empty coffee cup. Then she stood up and started searching the house for paper and pen. If her father wanted a war of words, she would give him one. Ezra reached Dry Creek just as the morning heat was starting to bite. The town was already awake. Farmers loading wagons, women hanging laundry, children running between the buildings like they had somewhere important to be. And standing outside the saloon, talking to Sheriff Marcus Dunn, was Silas Whitfield. Ezra pulled his horse to a stop. Silas hadn't seen him yet. The older man was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying across the street in fragments. Took her right out of my home. Unstable sheriff, you know how she gets. Need to find her before she hurts herself. Sheriff Dunn was nodding along, his face arranged in an expression of grave concern, but his eyes kept darting toward the saloon like he was calculating how soon he could get a drink. Ezra dismounted and tied his horse to the post outside Hattie's store. He didn't look at Silas, didn't acknowledge him, just walked straight inside. Hattie was behind the counter sorting through a shipment of fabric. Her son Caleb was stacking bags of flour in the corner. Both of them looked up when Ezra walked in. You found her, Hattie said. It wasn't a question. I found her. Hattie's hands went still on the fabric. How bad? 53 days in a grain barn. Rope burns on her wrists. Half starved. Caleb's head snapped up. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Where is she now? Hattie asked. My ranch. She's safe. For now. Hattie glanced toward the window. Silas is outside right now telling Marcus Dunn that you kidnapped his troubled daughter. By noon, half the town will believe it. Then we need to get ahead of him. How? Ezra leaned on the counter. Her mother kept a journal. Every time Silas hurt her, Emmeline wrote it down. Clara says it's hidden under the floorboards in her old bedroom. Hattie sucked in a breath. Emmeline told me she was keeping records. I didn't know where. We need that journal. Silas will be watching the house. Then we need someone he won't suspect. Caleb stepped forward. I'll go. Hattie turned to face her son. Absolutely not. Ma, listen to me. Caleb's voice was steady. Silas knows you. He knows Ezra. But I'm just the kid who stacks flour at the general store. He won't think twice about me. He has a shotgun, Caleb. I'm not planning to knock on the front door. Caleb looked at Ezra. You said the journal is under the floorboards in Clara's bedroom. Which room? I don't know. She didn't say. Then I'll need to ask her. Hattie opened her mouth to argue, but Ezra held up a hand. He's right, Hattie. Silas will be watching for me. He won't be watching for your boy. Hattie stared at her son for a long moment. Something passed between them, a whole conversation in a single look. You take the creek path, she finally said. You don't go near that house until you're sure Silas is in town. And if you see trouble, you run. You hear me? You run. Yes, ma'am. Caleb grabbed his hat and headed for the back door. Hattie watched him go, her face carved from stone. "That boy is going to give me gray hair," she muttered. "Looks like he already did." Hattie shot Ezra a look that could have curdled milk. Then she sighed. "What else do you need?" "Witnesses. People who saw Emmeline's bruises. People who heard Clara screaming." "That's a short list. Most folks in this town learned a long time ago to mind their own business." "Then we need the ones who didn't." Hattie was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Mrs. Aldrich. She lives on the property next to the Whitfields. If Clara was screaming, Josephine heard it." "Will she talk?" "I don't know. She's scared of Silas. Everyone is." Hattie paused. "But she was close with Emmeline. If anyone will stand up for that girl, it's her." "Anyone else?" "Dr. Mercer. He treated Emmeline a few times. Falls down the stairs, she always said. But Thomas knew better. We all did." Ezra's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't anyone do anything?" Hattie met his eyes. "Because doing something meant going against Silas Whitfield. And Silas has friends in places that matter." "Not anymore." The door to the store swung open. Both of them turned. Silas Whitfield stood in the doorway. He looked worse than Ezra remembered, thinner, older. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, the eyes of a man who had been drinking since dawn. But there was something else there too, something cold and calculating. "Well," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. "Isn't this cozy?" Hattie stepped forward, putting herself between Silas and the counter. "What do you want, Silas?" "I want to know where my daughter is." "I haven't seen Clara in weeks. You told me yourself she was sick." Silas's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She's been taken, Hattie. Some man rode onto my property yesterday and stole her right out of her room. Sheriff Dunn is putting together a search party as we speak." "A search party?" Hattie's voice was flat. "For a grown woman." "For a troubled woman. Clara hasn't been right since her mother died. You know that. Everyone knows that." Ezra stepped forward. Silas's eyes snapped to him. "You're Holloway, aren't you? The widower from the East Road." "That's right." "Funny thing." Silas's voice got quieter, more dangerous. "Someone matching your description was seen riding away from my property yesterday. On a horse that looked an awful lot like that gray mare tied up outside." "That's so." "That's so." Silas took a step closer. "Where is my daughter Holloway?" "I wouldn't know." "You're a liar." The word hung in the air between them. Ezra didn't flinch. "Call me what you want, Whitfield. But I'm not the one who locks his own flesh and blood in a barn for 53 days. Something flickered in Silas's eyes. Fear, maybe. Or rage. Hard to tell the difference anymore. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know what rope burns look like. I know what a padlock on a grain barn means. And I know what a woman sounds like when she's been counting the days." Silas's hand moved toward his hip, toward the pistol Ezra knew he was carrying. "Careful, Whitfield." Ezra's voice was calm, almost gentle. "This is a public street, lot of witnesses. Witnesses can be bought." "Not all of them." Silas stared at Ezra for a long, tense moment. Then he smiled, a cold, empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over, Holloway. That girl is my property, and I always collect what's mine." He turned and walked out of the store, letting the door slam behind him. Hattie let out a breath she'd been holding. "He's going to come after you." "I know. He's going to come after Clara." "I know that too." Ezra grabbed his hat from the counter. "Where are you going?" Hattie asked. "To find Mrs. Aldrich. If she heard Clara screaming, she's going to tell someone about it. And that someone is going to be Judge Prescott. Samuel won't want to get involved. His ranch depends on those water rights. That's exactly why he'll want to get involved." Ezra headed for the door. "A man protects what's his, Hattie. And right now, Silas Whitfield is threatening everything Judge Prescott has built. He was gone before she could argue. Caleb reached the Whitfield property just before noon. He'd taken the creek path like his mother told him, keeping low and quiet. The house sat silent. No smoke from the chimney, no movement behind the windows. Silas wasn't home. Caleb moved fast. He slipped through the back door, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The house smelled like dust and old whiskey. Like a place that had given up on being loved. Clara's room was at the end of the hall. He knew it by the faded flowers painted on the door. The kind of thing a mother would do for a little girl a long time ago. He pushed the door open. The room was small. A narrow bed, a dresser, a shelf filled with books. And on the floor, a worn rug that didn't quite fit the space. Caleb knelt down and pulled back the rug. The floorboards were loose. He could see the edges where someone had pried them up before and fitted them back. His fingers found the gap and he lifted. There it was. A leather journal, bound with a thin cord. Caleb picked it up and felt the weight of it in his hands. This was what Clara had been protecting. This was what Silas had locked her in a barn to get. He opened it to a random page. The handwriting was small and neat. The words were not. March 15th, 1873. He came home drunk again. Hit me in the kitchen where Clara couldn't see. I told her I slipped. She didn't believe me. She never believes me anymore. Caleb closed the journal. His hands were shaking. He tucked the book inside his shirt and headed for the door. That's when he heard the footsteps on the porch. Ezra found Mrs. Josephine Aldrich sitting on her porch staring at nothing. She was 74 years old with white hair and hands that never stopped moving. When Ezra rode up, she watched him with eyes that had seen too much and looked away from even more. "Mrs. Aldrich, I know who you are." Her voice was thin, tired. "You're the man who took Clara away." "I'm the man who opened a door." "That's not how Silas is telling it." "I know. That's why I'm here." Josephine's hands twisted in her lap. "I can't help you. Can't or won't." "Does it matter?" Ezra dismounted and walked to the edge of her porch. Close enough to talk, not close enough to threaten. "You heard her screaming, Mrs. Aldrich. For 53 nights you heard Clara Whitfield screaming in that barn. And you didn't do anything." Josephine flinched like he'd hit her. "I'm an old woman. What was I supposed to do? You could have told someone." "Who? The sheriff. Marcus Dunn owes Silas $300 from a poker game. The Dr. Thomas Mercer has been looking the other way for years." Her voice cracked. "There's no one in this town who will stand up to Silas Whitfield. No one." "There is now." Josephine looked at him, really looked. "You think you can beat him? I think Clara can, but she needs witnesses. People who will tell the truth about what they saw, what they heard. And you think I'm going to put my name on a piece of paper that says Silas Whitfield is a monster? I think you're going to do what you should have done 5 years ago when Emmeline Whitfield was still alive." Ezra's voice softened. "You were her friend, Mrs. Aldrich. You knew what was happening in that house. You knew and you stayed quiet. That's not a sin you can undo, but you can stop it from happening again." Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now. She didn't bother to wipe them away. "I hear her sometimes," she whispered. "At night. I hear Emmeline's voice asking me why I didn't help her. Asking me why I let her die in that house. Then help her daughter. Give her the justice her mother never got." Josephine was quiet for a long moment. Her hands had finally gone still. "Get me paper," she said. "And something to write with. I'll tell you everything I heard." Ezra pulled a notebook from his saddlebag. "Start from the beginning." Caleb pressed his back against the wall of Clara's bedroom, his heart pounding in his ears. The footsteps had stopped. Whoever was on the porch wasn't moving anymore, just standing there, waiting. Then a voice, low and familiar. "I know someone's in there. I can see the dust you kicked up. Sheriff Dunn." Caleb closed his eyes. Of course, Silas had sent the sheriff to check the house while he was in town making noise at the general store. "Come on out, son. No need to make this difficult." Caleb looked at the window. It was small, but he was thin. He could fit. He moved fast, sliding the window open as quietly as he could. The hinges creaked. Behind him, he heard the front door crash open. Caleb threw himself through the window and hit the ground running. "Stop right there." He didn't stop. He ran for the creek, the journal pressed tight against his chest. Behind him, he heard Dunn cursing, heard the heavy thud of boots trying to keep up. But Marcus Dunn was 50 pounds overweight and hadn't run anywhere in years. By the time he reached the creek, Caleb was gone. Clara was pacing the floor of Ezra's kitchen when she heard the horse approaching. She grabbed the rifle Ezra had left for her and moved to the window. Her hands were steady. 53 days in a barn had taught her a lot of things, and one of them was how to stay calm when everything inside her was screaming. But it wasn't Silas. It wasn't the sheriff. It was Caleb Brennan riding hard, his horse foaming at the mouth. Clara threw open the door. Caleb slid off his horse and stumbled toward her, pulling something from inside his shirt. "I got it," he gasped. "I got the journal." Clara's hands were shaking as she took it. She opened the cover, saw her mother's handwriting, and felt something crack inside her chest. "How did you—" "Doesn't matter. Sheriff Dunn almost caught me. He knows someone was in the house. He's going to tell your father." Clara's jaw tightened. "Then we need to move faster than they do." She turned and walked back into the house, the journal clutched to her chest like a weapon. Because that's exactly what it was. Her mother had built this, word by word, bruise by bruise, a record of everything Silas Whitfield had done, a truth he couldn't charm away or buy off. Clara sat down at the table and started reading. Ezra arrived back at the ranch just as the sun was getting low. He found Clara and Caleb at the kitchen table, papers spread between them. Mrs. Aldrich's statement was in his hand. 3 pages of everything she'd heard, dated and signed. "I got it," he said, setting the papers on the table. Clara looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I found something in the journal." "What?" "A letter. My mother wrote it 6 months before she died. She was going to send it to Judge Prescott, asking him to investigate. She never did." "Why not?" Clara's hands curled into fists. "Because my father found out. He told her if she sent it, he would make sure I disappeared, that no one would ever find me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He did it anyway. Just took him 5 more years. Ezra sat down across from her. "Can we use the letter?" "It proves she was afraid of him. It proves she knew what he was capable of." Clara pushed the letter across the table. "But it's not enough. We need more. I got Mrs. Aldrich. She'll testify to what she heard." "That's one witness." "There's also Dr. Mercer. Hattie says he treated your mother more than once. He knows the bruises weren't from falling downstairs." "Will he talk?" "He will if we give him a choice." Caleb spoke up. "What kind of choice?" Ezra's face was hard. "The kind where he decides whether he'd rather face Judge Prescott or face the whole town knowing he let a woman die." Clara stared at him. This man who had opened a door and stepped into her nightmare without hesitation. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Really? Why?" Ezra was silent for a long moment. "Because I spent 3 years telling myself that what happened to Sarah Dawson wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have stopped it, that it wasn't my place." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. It was my place. It's everyone's place. And I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen again." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you." He didn't pull away. "Don't thank me yet. Your father's got money friends and a lawyer who knows how to play dirty. This fight is just getting started." "I know." Clara's grip tightened. "But for the first time in 53 days, I'm not fighting alone." Outside, the sun dropped below the horizon. Somewhere in Dry Creek, Silas Whitfield was planning his next move. And Clara Mae Whitfield was ready for it. The telegram arrived at sunrise. Hattie brought it herself, riding hard through the morning mist. She dismounted before her horse had fully stopped and thrust the paper into Ezra's hands. "It's from Abilene," she said, breathing hard. "Silas sent for a lawyer." Ezra read the telegram. His face went cold. "Emmett Calhoun. You know him." "I know of him. He's the kind of lawyer who doesn't lose, and he doesn't care who he has to destroy to win." Clara appeared in the doorway. She saw the telegram in Ezra's hands. "What is it?" Ezra handed her the paper. "Your father's done playing games." Clara read the words. Her jaw tightened. "Calhoun is the one who got Marcus Dunn out of that assault charge 3 years ago. The one where everyone knew he was guilty." "That's right. And now he's coming here. For me." Ezra nodded. Clara crumpled the telegram in her fist. "Then we'd better be ready for him." She turned and walked back into the house, her mother's journal tucked under her arm. The war had officially begun. Emmett Calhoun arrived in Dry Creek on the noon stagecoach, dressed in a suit that cost more than most men in town made in a year. Clara watched him from the window of Hattie's store. He moved like a man who had never lost a fight and never planned to start. His smile was easy. His eyes were not. "That's him," Hattie said quietly. "That's the devil your father hired." Clara didn't respond. She was watching the way Calhoun shook hands with Sheriff Dunn, the way Dunn's whole body seemed to relax in his presence, like a dog greeting its master. "He's already got the sheriff," Clara said. "He had the sheriff before he got off the coach. Marcus Dunn is bought and paid for." Ezra stepped up beside them. "Where's he going?" They watched Calhoun walk past the saloon, past the hotel, straight toward the general store. "Here," Clara breathed. "He's coming here." Hattie moved fast. "Back room. Both of you. Now." Clara grabbed her mother's journal from the counter and followed Ezra through the curtain into the storeroom. They pressed themselves against the wall, barely breathing. The bell above the door chimed. "Mrs. Brennan." Calhoun's voice was smooth as honey. "What a pleasure." "Mr. Calhoun, can I help you with something?" "I'm looking for a young woman, Clara Whitfield. Her father is very worried about her." "I haven't seen Clara in weeks." "That's interesting, because I have 3 witnesses who say she was in this very store 2 days ago, with a man matching the description of Ezra Holloway." Silence. Clara's hand found Ezra's in the darkness. His grip was steady. "People see all kinds of things, Mr. Calhoun. Doesn't make them true." "No, it doesn't. But it does make them worth investigating." A pause. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mrs. Brennan. I'm here to help a father find his daughter. Surely you can understand that." "What I understand is that Silas Whitfield is a drunk and a gambler who hasn't done an honest day's work since his wife died. Grief affects people in different ways. So does locking your daughter in a barn for 53 days. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. When Calhoun spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Brennan. I hope you have proof. I hope you have a conscience, but we don't always get what we hope for, do we?" Footsteps. The bell chimed again. Then nothing. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows I'm here." Ezra's jaw was tight. "Then we need to move faster." They emerged from the storeroom. Hattie was standing behind the counter, her hands shaking slightly. "That man is dangerous," she said. "More dangerous than Silas ever was." "We need to get to Judge Prescott," Ezra said. "Today, before Calhoun files whatever he's planning to file. The judge is at his ranch, 20 miles south." Hattie looked at Clara. "You up for a hard ride?" Clara tucked the journal inside her shirt. "I've been ready for 53 days. They left through the back of the store, keeping to the alleys until they reached the edge of town. Caleb was waiting with 3 horses. "I'm coming with you," he said before anyone could argue. "Caleb?" Hattie started. "Ma, listen to me. If Calhoun finds out Clara is heading for Judge Prescott, he's going to try to stop her. She needs someone watching her back." "That's my job," Ezra said. "Then you need help." Caleb swung onto his horse. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's happening." Hattie stared at her son. Something passed between them, pride, maybe mixed with fear. "You come back safe," she said quietly. "You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." They rode hard, pushing the horses as fast as they dared. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy. Clara kept her eyes on the horizon. Every hoofbeat was a heartbeat. Every mile was a minute closer to something she had been waiting 5 years for. Justice. They were halfway to Prescott's ranch when Ezra pulled his horse to a stop. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Riders. Behind us." Caleb turned in his saddle. His face went pale. 3 men. Coming fast. Clara's stomach dropped. "Calhoun." "No." Ezra's voice was grim. "Those are your father's men. I recognize the one in front. Pete Harmon. He works for Silas." "What do we do?" Ezra looked at the terrain around them. Then he looked at Clara. "You keep riding. Caleb goes with you. I'll slow them down." "No." Clara's voice was sharp. "I'm not leaving you. This isn't a discussion. You have the journal. You have the witnesses. You're the only one who can make this work." He grabbed her horse's reins. "Get to Prescott. Tell him everything. Make him listen." "Ezra, go, now." He slapped her horse's flank. The animal bolted forward. Caleb was right behind her. Clara looked back once. She saw Ezra turn his horse to face the approaching riders, saw him reach for his rifle. Then the dust swallowed him up, and she couldn't see anything at all. Ezra waited until the riders were close enough to see their faces. Pete Harmon was in front just like he thought. 2 others flanked him. Men Ezra didn't recognize, but he knew the type. The kind who did dirty work for money and didn't ask questions. "Holloway," Pete called out. "Where's the girl?" "What girl?" "Don't play games with me. Silas wants his daughter back." "Silas can go to hell." Pete's hand moved toward his pistol. "That's not smart talk, friend." "I ain't your friend." Ezra's rifle was already in his hands. "And I ain't moving." The 3 men exchanged glances. They hadn't expected resistance. They'd expected a scared farmer who would fold at the first sign of trouble. They'd expected wrong. "There's 3 of us," Pete said slowly. "And 1 of you. I can count. So you know how this ends." "I know how it ends for the first man who draws." Ezra's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Question is, which one of you wants to be first?" Nobody moved. Ezra waited. His finger was steady on the trigger. His breathing was slow. Finally, Pete spat in the dirt. "This ain't over, Holloway." "No, it ain't." The 3 men turned their horses and rode back the way they came. Ezra watched them go. Then he turned and kicked his horse into a gallop, heading for Prescott's ranch. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. Clara and Caleb reached Judge Prescott's ranch just as the sun was starting to slip. The ranch was bigger than Clara expected, more prosperous, the kind of place that depended on water to survive, water that her father wanted to control. A man came out of the main house as they dismounted. He was older, with a neat white beard and eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Whitfield, I presume?" Clara stepped forward. "Judge Prescott." "That's right. I heard you might be coming." He looked at Caleb, then back at Clara. "Hattie Brennan sent word this morning. Said you had something I needed to see." Clara pulled the journal from inside her shirt. "This belonged to my mother. She kept records of everything my father did to her. Every threat, every bruise, every time he came home drunk and hurt her." Prescott took the journal carefully, like it was made of glass. "May I?" "Please." He opened it, read a few pages. His face didn't change, but Clara saw something shift in his eyes. "Come inside," he said. "Both of you. We have a lot to discuss." The study was filled with books and papers. Judge Prescott sat behind a heavy desk while Clara and Caleb took chairs across from him. "I knew your mother," Prescott said, still turning pages in the journal. "Emmeline was a good woman. She deserved better than what she got." "Then help me give her justice." Prescott looked up. "You understand what you're asking. Silas Whitfield has friends in this county. Important friends. Men who owe him favors. I understand. And you understand that if we pursue this, it's going to get ugly. Calhoun is already in town. He's probably filing motions as we speak." "What kind of motions?" Prescott's face was grim. "The kind that says you're not competent to manage your own affairs. The kind that says you need a guardian to make decisions for you." Clara's blood went cold. "He can do that. He can try. All he needs is a doctor willing to sign an affidavit saying you're mentally unstable." "But I'm not." "I know that. You know that. But Calhoun doesn't need the truth. He just needs enough doubt to muddy the waters." Caleb leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Prescott set the journal down on his desk. "We file first. I'll write up an emergency petition to freeze all property transfers until a full hearing can be held. I'll also request an independent medical examination by a doctor I choose not one on Silas's payroll. Will that be enough?" "It'll buy us time. But Clara," he met her eyes, "you need to understand something. Even with this journal, even with witnesses, there's no guarantee we win. The law isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's about who tells the better story." Clara thought about 53 marks scratched into a wooden beam. About the darkness. About the silence. "Then I'll tell my story," she said, "and I'll tell it louder than anyone has ever heard." Prescott studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Your mother would be proud. My mother would be furious it took this long." Something that might have been a smile crossed the judge's face. "That too." The door burst open. Ezra stumbled in, breathing hard. "They're coming. Silas and Calhoun. They're about 20 minutes behind me." Prescott stood. "How many men?" "Just the two of them. Plus Sheriff Dunn." "Marcus wouldn't dare." "He would if Calhoun told him to." Ezra looked at Clara. "They know you're here. Pete Harmon must have doubled back and told them." Clara stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Let them come." Clara. "No." She turned to face the door. "I'm done running. I'm done hiding. If my father wants to face me, he can do it right here, right now." Prescott moved to stand beside her. "This is my property. Silas has no authority here." "That won't stop Calhoun from trying," Ezra said. "Then let him try." Clara's chin lifted. "I've got my mother's journal. I've got witnesses. And I've got a judge who's willing to listen. That's more than I've ever had before." Caleb moved to stand on her other side. Then Ezra. The four of them waited. Silas Whitfield rode onto Judge Prescott's property like he owned it. Calhoun was beside him, that easy smile still plastered on his face. Sheriff Dunn brought up the rear, looking uncomfortable. Clara watched them approach. Her father looked worse than she remembered. Thinner, older. The drinking had hollowed him out from the inside. But his eyes were still the same, cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who saw his daughter as property, not a person. "Samuel." Silas dismounted first. "I appreciate you looking after my girl, but it's time for her to come home." "Clara is a grown woman, Silas. She can go wherever she pleases." "She's not well. You know that. Everyone knows that." Silas's voice was soft, reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted people to believe him. Ever since her mother died, she hasn't been right. These delusions she has about me, about what happened. Stop! Clara's voice cut through the air like a blade. Everyone went still. She stepped forward past Prescott, past Ezra. I'm standing right here, Father. You want to call me crazy? Do it to my face. Silas's expression flickered, just for a moment. Clara, honey. Don't you dare use that voice with me. Not after what you did. I was trying to protect you. You locked me in a barn for 53 days. Clara's voice broke. You put ropes on my wrists. You fed me like a dog. You made me sign away my mother's land in the dark because I was so hungry I couldn't think straight. That's not... I counted every day, every single day. I scratched marks into the wood because I was afraid I would lose track of time. I was afraid I would lose my mind. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. And you stood on the other side of that door and pretended you couldn't hear me breathing. Silence. Calhoun stepped forward. Miss Whitfield, I understand you're upset. Don't talk to me. Clara didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on her father. You don't get to speak. You weren't there. You don't know what he did. I know what the law says. The law. Clara laughed, a harsh, broken sound. The law says a father can lock his daughter in a barn until she signs over her property. The law says a man can beat his wife for years, and no one has to do anything about it. The law protected him. She pointed at Silas. And the law is going to help me destroy him. Prescott stepped forward. That's enough. Silas Calhoun, I suggest you leave. Now. We have a court order. Calhoun started. You have nothing. Prescott's voice was ice. I've already filed an emergency petition freezing all property transfers. Any motions you've filed will have to wait until a proper hearing. Calhoun's smile finally faltered. You can't do that. I just did. This case is going to be decided in a courtroom, not on my front porch. Until then, Clara Whitfield stays where she chooses to stay. Silas's face contorted with rage. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman who owns property in her own name. Property you tried to steal from her. Prescott's gaze was merciless. I've read Emmeline's journal, Silas. I know what you did to her. I know what you did to Clara. And when this goes to court, everyone else is going to know too. Silas staggered back like he'd been struck. That journal is lies. Emmeline was... Careful. Clara's voice was quiet now. Dangerous. Be very careful what you say about my mother. Father and daughter stared at each other across the dust. For a moment, something flickered in Silas's eyes. Something that might have been shame, or fear, or the ghost of the man he used to be before the war, and the whiskey took everything good from him. Then it was gone. This isn't over, he said. No. Clara's voice didn't waver. It's not. But the part where you control me is. That part is finished. Silas turned and mounted his horse. Calhoun followed, his face tight, with barely contained fury. Sheriff Dunn lingered for a moment, looking at Clara with something that might have been guilt. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know. Yes, you did. Clara's voice was flat. You knew. You just didn't care enough to do anything. Dunn looked away. Then he turned his horse and followed the others back down the road. Clara watched them go. Her whole body was trembling. Then Ezra was beside her, one hand on her shoulder. You did good, he said. I don't feel good. I feel like I'm going to be sick. That's how you know it was real. He turned her gently to face him. You just stood up to the man who locked you in a barn for 53 days. You looked him in the eye and told him the truth. That takes more courage than most people have in their whole lives. Clara looked up at him. This man who had opened a door and walked into her nightmare without hesitation. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You just didn't have to. She leaned into him just for a moment, let herself be held. Then she straightened. What happens now? Prescott appeared in the doorway. Now we prepare for court. Calhoun is going to throw everything he has at us. We need to be ready. Clara nodded. Tell me what to do. First, you need to write down everything. Every day you were in that barn, every word your father said, every detail you can remember. I remember all of it. I know you do. Prescott's voice was gentle. That's what's going to win this case. That night, Clara sat at Prescott's desk and wrote. She wrote about the darkness, about the hunger, about the rope burns on her wrists and the sound of her father's boots on the dirt outside the door. She wrote about day 12 when she finally signed the land deed because she was so weak she couldn't hold out anymore, about the shame she felt afterward, about the rage that replaced it. She wrote about the 53 marks on the beam, about how she scratched each one with her fingernail until it bled, about how she counted them every morning to make sure she hadn't lost her mind. She wrote about her mother, about the journal hidden under the floorboards, about the letter Emmeline had wanted to send to Judge Prescott but never did. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned. When she finally looked up, Ezra was standing in the doorway. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't. Not yet." Clara set down the pen. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that barn. I can smell it. Feel it. The darkness closes in, and I can't breathe." Ezra walked into the room and sat down across from her. "That's going to happen for a while. Maybe a long while, but it gets better." "How do you know?" "Because after Louisa died, I couldn't sleep either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice." He looked down at his hands. "Some nights I still do." "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No, but you learn to carry it. You learn that the hurt is part of loving someone, and that's not something you want to lose." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how to love my father anymore. I don't know if I ever did. What I felt for him, I think it was just fear dressed up as something else." "That's not your fault." "I know, but it still hurts." She looked at the pages spread across the desk. All these words, all this pain, and for what? So a judge can read it and decide whether I deserve to keep what my mother left me. So the truth can come out. So what he did doesn't stay hidden. Ezra leaned forward. "You're not just fighting for yourself, Clara. You're fighting for every woman who ever stayed quiet because she was afraid. You're fighting for your mother." Clara looked at him, really looked. "You're a good man, Ezra Holloway. I'm a man who's trying to do better than he did before. That's the same thing." She reached across the desk and took his hand. "When this is over," she said quietly, "I'm going to rebuild my mother's house, plant her garden, make it what it was supposed to be. That's a lot of work." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I might need help." Ezra's eyes met hers. "You'll have it." The hearing was set for 3 days later. Calhoun filed every motion he could think of. Competency hearings, property disputes, character witnesses who swore up and down that Silas Whitfield was a good man who only wanted what was best for his troubled daughter. But Prescott filed right back. Mrs. Aldrich's statement, Dr. Mercer's testimony, Emmeline's journal with every entry dated and verified, and Clara's own account, 53 days of darkness written in her own hand. The night before the hearing, Clara stood on Prescott's porch and looked up at the stars. Caleb found her there. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified?" "Good." He leaned against the railing beside her. "Means you understand what's at stake." "I've understood what's at stake my whole life. I just never thought I'd get a chance to do anything about it." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My ma told me something once. She said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the thing anyway. Your mother is a wise woman. She'd say she's just stubborn. Caleb looked at her. You're going to win tomorrow. You know that, right? I don't know anything. I do. I've watched you face down your father, face down his lawyer, face down everyone who tried to make you small. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Clara turned to face him. Why did you come with us? Really, you could have stayed in town, stayed safe. Caleb's jaw tightened. Because my ma spent years feeling guilty that she didn't kick your father's door down when she first suspected something was wrong. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeling the same way. That's not the only reason. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said quietly. It's not. Something passed between them. Something neither of them was ready to name. Then the door opened behind them, and Ezra stepped out. We should all get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Clara nodded. She looked at Caleb one more time. Thank you, she said, for everything. Don't thank me yet. He pushed off the railing. Save it for after we win. He walked past her into the house. Clara stayed on the porch a moment longer, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow, she would face her father in a courtroom. Tomorrow, she would tell the truth to anyone who would listen. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just had to survive one more night. The courthouse was packed. Clara hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected half of Dry Creek to show up at dawn, filling every seat and lining the walls. She hadn't expected to see faces she recognized: the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, the woman who ran the boarding house, people who had known her mother, people who had looked the other way. Now they were looking at her. Ezra walked beside her as she entered the courtroom. Caleb was on her other side. Hattie had arrived an hour earlier to secure a seat in the front row. Behind her sat Mrs. Aldrich clutching a handkerchief, and Dr. Mercer, who couldn't quite meet Clara's eyes. On the other side of the room, Silas Whitfield sat next to Emmett Calhoun. Her father looked different, sober, clean-shaven. He wore a suit Clara had never seen before, probably bought with money he didn't have. He looked like a respectable man, a grieving father, a victim. Clara's stomach turned. Judge Prescott had recused himself from the case, citing the conflict of interest with his own water rights. In his place sat Judge Arthur Waverly from Abilene. A man Clara didn't know. A man who didn't know her. That scared her more than anything. Waverly called the court to order. His voice was crisp, professional, unreadable. We're here today to address the petition filed by Miss Clara Mae Whitfield against Mr. Silas Jeremiah Whitfield. The petition alleges unlawful imprisonment, coercion, and fraudulent property transfer. He looked at Calhoun. Mr. Calhoun, I understand you've filed a counter motion regarding Miss Whitfield's competency. That's correct, Your Honor. Calhoun stood smooth as silk. We believe Miss Whitfield is suffering from severe melancholia following the death of her mother. Her allegations against her father are the product of a troubled mind, not reality. And your evidence for this claim? We have affidavits from 3 physicians who have treated Miss Whitfield over the years. Objection. Clara's lawyer, a young man named Thomas Reed, whom Prescott had recommended, rose to his feet. Those physicians have never examined my client. Their affidavits are based entirely on hearsay provided by Mr. Whitfield himself. Waverly's eyebrows rose. Is this true, Mr. Calhoun? The physicians relied on detailed accounts from a concerned father. So that's a yes. Waverly made a note. Motion denied. If you want to question Miss Whitfield's competency, you'll need an actual examination by a neutral physician. Do you have one? Calhoun's jaw tightened. Not at this time, Your Honor. Then we'll proceed with the primary petition. Mr. Reed, call your first witness. Reed stood. The petitioner calls Mrs. Josephine Aldrich. Mrs. Aldrich walked to the witness stand like she was approaching her own execution. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Clara, once then away. Mrs. Aldrich, Reed began gently, how long have you lived on the property adjacent to the Whitfield ranch? 32 years. And during that time you knew the Whitfield family well. I knew Emmeline. She was my friend. Did you ever see or hear anything that concerned you about the Whitfield household? Josephine's hands twisted in her lap. I heard screaming. The courtroom went still. When did you hear this screaming, Mrs. Aldrich? This summer, starting in late May. I heard it at night mostly, coming from somewhere on the Whitfield property. For how long? 53 nights. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Waverly banged his gavel once. And what did you do when you heard this screaming? Josephine's face crumpled. Nothing. God help me, I did nothing. I told myself it was an animal. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself... She broke down, tears streaming down her face. I told myself the same lies I told when Emmeline was alive. Objection. Calhoun was on his feet. The witness is speculating. She's testifying to her own actions and thoughts. Reed countered. That's not speculation. Overruled, Waverly said. Continue, Mrs. Aldrich. Josephine wiped her eyes. I knew something was wrong in that house. I knew it when Emmeline was alive. I knew it after she died. And when I heard Clara screaming, I knew it was happening again. But I was too scared to do anything. She looked at Clara. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Clara's throat was tight. She nodded once. Calhoun stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Aldrich, you say you heard screaming, but you never actually saw Miss Whitfield being held against her will, did you? No. And you never saw any evidence of physical abuse? I saw Emmeline's bruises. Years ago, she said she fell. But you never witnessed Mr. Whitfield strike anyone? No. So your testimony is based entirely on sounds you heard at night. Sounds that could have been anything. Josephine's jaw tightened. I know what a woman sounds like when she's begging for help. I heard it from Emmeline. I heard it from Clara. It was the same voice, the same fear. Calhoun paused. He hadn't expected that. No further questions, he said quietly. Dr. Mercer was next. He took the stand with his shoulders hunched like a man trying to make himself smaller. Dr. Mercer, Reed began. You treated Emmeline Whitfield on multiple occasions before her death. Is that correct? Yes. And what were you treating her for? Mercer hesitated. Injuries, bruises, a broken wrist once. What caused these injuries? She said she fell. Did you believe her? A long pause. No. Why not? Because the injuries weren't consistent with falling. They were consistent with... Mercer's voice dropped. With being struck. Did you ever report your suspicions to anyone? No. Why not? Mercer finally looked up. His eyes found Silas across the room. Because I was afraid. Silas Whitfield is a powerful man in this county. He has friends. He has money. He has a way of making problems disappear. Mercer's voice cracked. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself she would leave if it got bad enough, but she never did, and then she died. How did she die, doctor? Officially consumption, but she'd been getting weaker for years, worn down, broken. Mercer's hands were shaking. I think she just gave up. Clara closed her eyes. She could feel her mother's presence in the room as real as if Emmeline were sitting beside her. Calhoun's cross-examination was brief. He tried to paint Mercer as unreliable as someone with a guilty conscience looking for absolution. But the damage was done. The courtroom had heard enough. Then it was Clara's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her head high. Her hands were steady. Inside, she was screaming. Reed began with simple questions: her name, her age, her relationship to the defendant. Then he asked her to tell the court what happened. Clara took a breath. On May 23rd of this year, My father locked me in the grain barn behind our house. He put a padlock on the door and kept me there for 53 days. Why did he do this? Because I wouldn't sign over my mother's water rights. She left them to me when she died. They're the most valuable property in the county. My father wanted them to pay off his gambling debts. Did you eventually sign? I signed the land deed on day 12. I was so hungry and weak I couldn't hold out anymore. But I refused to sign the water rights. That's why he kept me there for 41 more days. How did you survive? Clara looked at her father. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He brought me food, not much. Hardtack, jerky, just enough to keep me alive. He needed me alive. Dead, I couldn't sign anything. How did you keep track of time? I scratched marks into a wooden beam. 1 mark for each day. My fingernails bled, but I kept scratching. I was afraid if I lost count, I would lose myself. And how did you eventually escape? Clara looked at Ezra. He nodded slightly. A man named Ezra Holloway found me. Hattie Brennan sent him to check on me. He opened the door and let me out. Objection. Calhoun was on his feet. Mr. Holloway had no authority to enter the Whitfield property. He had every authority to rescue a woman being held prisoner, Reed shot back. There's no proof she was a prisoner. There are 53 marks scratched into a beam and rope burns on her wrists. Reed's voice rose. What more proof does he need? Waverly banged his gavel. Enough. Mr. Calhoun, save it for cross-examination. Calhoun sat down. His face flushed. Reed turned back to Clara. One more question. Why do you think your father did this? Clara was quiet for a moment. Because he stopped seeing me as his daughter a long time ago. After my mother died, I became just another thing he owned. Another asset to control. She looked at Silas. My mother left me those water rights because she knew what he was. She knew he would try to take everything from me. And she was right. Calhoun's cross-examination was brutal. Miss Whitfield, you claim your father locked you in a barn, but isn't it true that you've suffered from episodes of melancholia since your mother's death? No. Isn't it true that you've had periods where you couldn't leave your room, where you refused to see anyone? I was grieving. That's not the same thing. Isn't it true that your father was simply trying to protect you from yourself? Clara's hands curled into fists. My father wasn't protecting me. He was imprisoning me. You say you scratched marks into a beam, 53 of them. Don't you think that sounds like the behavior of someone who's disturbed? It sounds like the behavior of someone who was trying to survive. Calhoun smiled. That cold, confident smile that made Clara's skin crawl. Miss Whitfield, you've painted a very dramatic picture today. A helpless daughter, a cruel father, a heroic rescue. But isn't it possible that you've constructed this narrative to cover your own instability? Isn't it possible that your father was simply trying to help you and you've twisted it into something sinister? Clara stood up in the witness box. You want to know what's sinister, Mr. Calhoun? Listening to your father's footsteps outside the door every night and knowing he could let you out, but he won't. Smelling whiskey through the cracks in the wood and knowing he's right there drinking while you're starving. Hearing him tell people you're sick when you're not sick. Hearing him tell people you're crazy when the only crazy thing is what he's doing to you. Her voice was shaking now, but she didn't care. I spent 53 days in the dark. I counted every one of them because that's all I had. And you sit there in your fancy suit and ask me if I'm disturbed. Clara pointed at her father. He's the one who put a padlock on his own daughter's door. He's the one who made me sign away my mother's land while I was so hungry I could barely hold a pen. He's the one who's disturbed, not me. The courtroom was silent. Calhoun opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No further questions, he said. Waverly called a recess. Clara stumbled out of the courtroom, her legs barely holding her. Ezra caught her arm before she fell. You did it, he said quietly. You told the truth. I don't feel like I did anything. I feel like I'm going to shatter into a million pieces." "That's how you know it was real." Hattie appeared beside them. "The whole town is talking. I've never seen anything like it." "What are they saying?" "Half of them are saying they always knew Silas was bad. The other half are pretending they never defended him." Hattie's smile was grim. "Funny how that works." Caleb pushed through the crowd. "The judge is coming back early. Something's happening." They hurried back inside. Judge Waverly was already seated, his face unreadable. But there was something different in the room. A tension that hadn't been there before. Clara looked at her father's table. Silas was gone. Calhoun sat alone, shuffling papers. He looked rattled. For the first time since he'd arrived in Dry Creek, he looked uncertain. "Where's the defendant?" Waverly asked. Calhoun stood slowly. "Your Honor, my client has withdrawn from these proceedings." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. "Withdrawn how?" "He left during the recess. He asked me to inform the court that he will not contest Miss Whitfield's claims." Clara's heart stopped. "Is this a guilty plea?" "It's an acknowledgement that further litigation would be futile." Calhoun's voice was flat, defeated. "My client recognizes that the evidence against him is substantial. He has chosen to surrender his claims to the property in question and accept whatever judgment the court deems appropriate." Waverly leaned back in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand. Your client locked his daughter in a barn for 53 days, coerced her into signing over property, and now he's just giving up." "That's correct, Your Honor." "Where is he now?" Calhoun hesitated. "I don't know. He didn't say." Clara rose to her feet. "He's running." Every eye in the room turned to her. "He knows he can't win. He knows what these people heard today. So he's running just like he's been running from the truth his whole life." Clara's voice was steady now, certain. "I want him found. I want him held accountable, not just for me, for my mother." Waverly studied her for a long moment. "Miss Whitfield, based on the testimony presented today, I'm ruling in your favor. The land deed you signed under duress is hereby voided. The water rights remain in your name as your mother intended. All property claims made by your father are dismissed." Clara's knees went weak. Ezra's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "As for Mr. Whitfield himself," Waverly continued, "I'm issuing a warrant for his arrest on charges of unlawful imprisonment, coercion, and assault. Sheriff Dunn, you will execute this warrant immediately." Dunn, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom looking like he wanted to disappear, stood up slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Sheriff," Waverly's voice was sharp, "if I hear that you've given Mr. Whitfield any advance warning, I'll have you arrested too." Dunn's face went pale. "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel came down. "Court is adjourned." Clara walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. People she didn't know shook her hand. Women she barely recognized hugged her and cried. The schoolteacher told her that her mother would be proud. The blacksmith said he was sorry he hadn't done more. Clara accepted it all in a daze. She had won. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. Like finally reaching the surface after drowning for years. Hattie found her standing alone near the hitching post. "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." Hattie paused. "Your father's gone. Sheriff Dunn is organizing a search party, but Silas knows this land better than anyone. He could be anywhere by now." "He'll be caught eventually." "Maybe, maybe not. Does it matter?" Clara thought about it. "No," she said finally. "I think I've spent enough of my life waiting for him to be punished. I'm done waiting for anything." Ezra and Caleb joined them. Both men looked exhausted but relieved. What happens now? Caleb asked. Clara looked at the road leading out of town, the road that led to her mother's house, her house now. Now I go home, she said, and I start over. Ezra stepped closer. You want some company? Clara looked at him. This man who had opened a door and changed everything. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I do. Caleb watched them, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded. I'll tell my ma you're safe. She'll want to know. Thank you, Caleb, for everything. He tipped his hat. Don't mention it. He walked away without looking back. Clara and Ezra rode to the Whitfield property as the sun began its slow descent. The house looked different somehow. Smaller, less threatening. Just a building where bad things had happened, not a prison anymore. Clara dismounted and stood looking at it. I was so afraid of this place, she said. For so long I was afraid of everything he could do to me here. But he's gone now, and I'm still standing. You're more than standing. You're winning. We haven't found him yet. We will. But even if we don't, you already won, Clara. The moment you told the truth in that courtroom, you won. Everything else is just details. Clara turned to face him. Will you stay tonight? Ezra hesitated. Clara, not like that. I don't want to be alone. Not yet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll sleep in the barn. There's a guest room. The barn is fine, after everything that happened there. He paused. Maybe it needs some good memories. Clara almost smiled. That's a strange way to look at it. I'm a strange man. They walked toward the house together. For the first time in years, Clara unlocked her own front door with her own key. She was home. That night, Clara sat at her mother's writing desk and opened the journal one more time. She turned to the last entry. The words her mother had written 6 months before she died. I know what Silas is. I know what he's capable of. But Clara is strong, stronger than me. If anything happens, she'll know where to find this. She'll know what to do. I'm leaving her everything. The land, the water, the truth. Someday she'll use it. Clara closed the journal. I did, Mama, she whispered. I used it all. Outside, the stars were coming out. The same stars that had watched over 53 nights of darkness. Clara wasn't counting anymore. She didn't have to. Clara was in her mother's garden when Ezra rode up with the news. She had been on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds that had grown wild over 5 years of neglect. Her hands were filthy. Her back ached. She had never felt more alive. They caught him, Ezra said, dismounting. Deputy Marshal found him hiding in an abandoned mine shaft 20 miles north. Clara sat back on her heels. She waited for something to shift inside her. Relief, maybe. Or triumph. Or fear. Nothing came. Is he hurt? Does it matter? I don't know. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt. I keep waiting to feel something. Anger. Satisfaction. Something. But there's just nothing. Ezra walked closer. That's not nothing. That's freedom. Is that what this is? You spent 53 days waiting for him to open a door. Now he's going to spend years waiting for someone to open his. Ezra's voice was gentle. You don't have to feel anything about that, Clara. You just have to let it be over. Clara looked at the garden. At the tomato plants she had put in the ground last week. At the bean poles Caleb had helped her build. At the fence Ezra had mended without being asked. It doesn't feel over, she said quietly. It feels like it's just beginning. Maybe that's what freedom is, the beginning of something instead of the end. She turned to face him, this man who had opened a door and walked into her life without hesitation. This man who had slept in her barn for 3 weeks because he didn't want her to be alone. Ezra. Yeah. Thank you. For what? for not trying to save me, for just being here while I saved myself. Something shifted in his eyes, something warm. You didn't need saving Clara. You just needed someone to open the door. Everything after that was you. She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Stay," she said. "Not in the barn. Here, with me." Ezra was quiet for a long moment. "Clara, I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel like I've spent my whole life waiting for permission to want something, and I'm done waiting." She took his hand. "I want you to stay, not because I need you, because I choose you." His fingers tightened around hers. "Then I'll stay." The letter arrived 2 days later. Clara recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. That familiar scrawl, shakier than she remembered. She stood on the porch and stared at the envelope for a full minute before tearing it open. "Clara, they tell me I'll be in here for a long time. 5 years, maybe more. I don't expect you to visit. I don't expect anything from you anymore. I want you to know that I remember who I used to be. Before the war. Before the whiskey. Before everything went wrong. I remember teaching you to ride. I remember building that shelf for your books. I remember your mother's face when you were born, how she looked at you like you were the whole world. I don't know when I stopped seeing you that way. I don't know when you became something to control instead of someone to love. But I know it happened, and I know it was my fault. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that somewhere inside the man who locked you in that barn, there's still a piece of the father who built you that shelf. He's ashamed of what he became. He's sorry for what he did. I don't expect that to mean anything to you. But I needed to say it. Your father." Clara read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the wooden box with her mother's things. Ezra found her there an hour later, sitting on the porch with the box in her lap. "What's that?" "A letter, from my father." "What does it say?" "That he's sorry. That he remembers who he used to be." Clara's voice was steady. "That somewhere inside the monster there's still a piece of the man I loved." "Do you believe him?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I believe he means it today. I don't believe it will last." She looked at Ezra. "But for right now in this moment I believe him, and I don't know if that's enough. It doesn't have to be enough. It just has to be true." Woi, she leaned into him, let herself be held. "I'm not going to write back," she said. "Not yet, maybe not ever, but I'm going to keep this letter. Because someday I might need to remember that he was capable of being sorry. That's more grace than most people would give. It's not grace, it's just understanding. I understand what he became. I understand why. And I understand that understanding isn't the same as forgiving." She closed the box. Some things can't be forgiven. They can only be survived. Hattie threw a party. Not officially, of course. She called it a community gathering at the general store, but everyone knew what it really was. A celebration. An acknowledgement that something had changed in Dry Creek. Clara wore a blue cotton dress that Hattie had made for her. Her mother's silver necklace hung around her throat, the one with the oak leaf pendant that Emmeline had worn every day of her life. The whole town turned out. People who had known Clara since she was born. People who had looked away when they should have looked closer. People who were trying in their own small ways to make amends. Mrs. Aldrich hugged Clara so tight she could barely breathe. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "I see her in you. I see her strength. I learned it from her." "You learned it from yourself. She just showed you where to look." Dr. Mercer shook Clara's hand with tears in his eyes. I should have done more. Years ago, I should have. You did what you could do today. That's what matters. Is it enough? Clara looked at him. This man who had failed her mother and was trying not to fail her. It's a start, she said. That's all any of us can offer. Caleb was there standing near the punch bowl with a cup he hadn't touched. He watched Clara move through the room, accepting congratulations and well wishes. He watched Ezra hover nearby, protective, without being possessive. When Clara finally made her way to him, Caleb straightened. Quite a party, he said. Your mother knows how to throw one. She's been planning this for weeks, said the town needed something to celebrate. He paused. She was right. Clara looked at him, really looked. Caleb, I want to thank you for everything you did. The journal, the risk you took, all of it. You don't have to thank me. I want to. She touched his arm. You're a good man, one of the best I've ever known. Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like acceptance. So is he, Caleb said quietly, nodding toward Ezra. Holloway, I mean. He's a good man. I know. He'll take care of you. I don't need taking care of, but I won't mind the company. Caleb smiled. A small, rueful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I hope you're happy, Clara. Really. I hope you get everything you deserve. Thank you, Caleb. He tipped his hat and walked away. Clara watched him go, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. Another door closing, another path not taken. But she had chosen her path, and she didn't regret it. The dance started at sunset. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else had brought a guitar. The music wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Ezra found Clara standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the dancers spin and laugh. You going to stand there all night? I don't know how to dance. Neither do I. Then why are you asking? Because I figure we can learn together. He held out his hand. What do you say? Clara looked at his hand, rough and calloused. The hand of a man who worked hard and didn't complain. The hand that had opened a door and changed her life. She took it. They danced badly, stepped on each other's feet, missed the rhythm entirely. But they were laughing, and that was something Clara hadn't done in longer than she could remember. When the music slowed, Ezra pulled her closer. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About what happens next, after all this settles down. What do you mean? I mean, he took a breath. I've been sleeping in your barn for 3 weeks, and I've been helping you fix up the property, and I've been sitting on your porch every evening watching the sun go down. I know, I've been there. What I'm trying to say is, he stopped dancing, looked her in the eyes. I don't want to go back to my place, Clara. I don't want to be alone anymore. I want to be here, with you, for as long as you'll have me. Clara's heart was pounding. Ezra, are you asking me? I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. That can come later if you want it. Right now I'm just asking you to let me stay, to let me be part of whatever you're building here. She reached up and touched his face. I already told you to stay. I know, but I needed to tell you why I want to. Why? Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I opened that door and saw you sitting in the dark, I knew my life was never going to be the same. His voice dropped. And I was right. Clara kissed him. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. Not the kind of thing you read about in books. It was simple and honest and real. The kind of kiss that said everything without words. When they pulled apart, Ezra was smiling. So that's a yes. That's a yes. 2 months later, the harvest came in. Clara stood in her mother's garden. Her garden now, and looked at what she had built. Tomatoes heavy on the vine. Beans climbing the poles. squash spreading across the ground in a riot of green and orange. She had done this. With her own hands. On her own land. Ezra came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Quite a crop. Mama would have been proud. She is proud, wherever she is. Clara leaned back into him. The silver oak leaf pendant caught the light. I've been thinking about the water rights, she said. What about them? I want to share them. With the other ranches downstream. The way my mother intended. That's generous. It's fair. My mother didn't file those rights to control people. She filed them to help the community, and I want to honor that. Judge Prescott will be relieved. He already knows, I told him last week. Clara smiled. He said my mother would have approved. Then he got all misty-eyed and pretended he had dust in his eye. Ezra laughed, a real, genuine laugh that Clara never got tired of hearing. So what's next? He asked. I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't know what's coming, and I think I'm okay with that. No more counting days. Clara turned in his arms to face him. No more counting days. I'm done surviving, Ezra. I want to start living. He kissed her forehead. Then let's live. The Dry Creek Harvest Festival was the biggest the town had seen in years. Everyone came. Farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and school teachers. Even some folks from the surrounding counties who had heard about what happened in Silas Whitfield's barn and wanted to see the woman who had stood up to him. Clara wore her mother's silver necklace and a new dress white with blue flowers that she had bought with money she earned selling vegetables from her garden. She danced with Ezra. She danced with Caleb, who had finally started smiling again. She danced with Judge Prescott, who was surprisingly light on his feet for a man of 62. Mrs. Aldrich watched from a chair against the wall, happy tears streaming down her face. Dr. Mercer played the fiddle, and he wasn't very good, but nobody cared. Hattie found Clara near the punch bowl. I have something for you, she said. What is it? Hattie pressed a small object into Clara's hand. It was a key, old and tarnished, but solid. This was your mother's. She gave it to me years ago. Told me to keep it safe until Clara was ready. Ready for what? She didn't say. But I think I know. Hattie's eyes were bright. It's the key to her hope chest, the one in your attic. She said there was something inside that you'd need someday. Clara stared at the key. I didn't know she left me anything else. Your mother left you everything, Clara. Every piece of wisdom, every bit of strength, everything she was, she put into you. Hattie squeezed her hand. Go find out what's in that chest. I'll keep everyone entertained. Clara climbed to the attic alone. The hope chest was in the corner covered with a dusty sheet. She pulled it off and knelt beside it, the key trembling in her hand. She turned the lock. Inside she found letters, dozens of them. Letters her mother had written to her over the years but never sent. Letters full of love and hope and advice for a future Emmeline knew she might not live to see. And beneath the letters, a single sheet of paper. Clara unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a deed. A water rights deed dated 5 years ago. But this one wasn't for the Whitfield property. It was for a spring on the north side of the county. A spring Clara had never heard of. And it was in Clara's name. Attached was a note in her mother's handwriting. Clara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and things have gotten bad. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. But I want you to know something. No matter what your father takes from you, no matter how dark things get, you have options. You have a future he doesn't know about. This spring is yours. It's far from his reach, far from his debts, far from everything he's done. If you ever need to start over, if you ever need to disappear and begin again, this is your escape. But I hope you don't need it. I hope you're stronger than me. I hope you fight back in ways I never could. I love you, Clara. I always have. I always will. Mama. Clara sat in the dusty attic holding her mother's words and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Her mother had planned for everything, even this, even the possibility that Clara would need to run. But Clara wasn't running anymore. She folded the deed carefully and put it back in the chest with the letters. She would keep it safe. She would remember what it represented: her mother's love, her mother's foresight, her mother's belief that Clara would survive. But she wouldn't use it. She didn't need an escape anymore. She had a home. Clara came down from the attic and walked back to the festival. Ezra was waiting for her by the edge of the dance floor. He saw her face, the tear tracks, the smile, and understood without asking. "You okay?" "Better than okay." She took his hand. "Dance with me." Again. Always. They danced as the stars came out one by one. The same stars that had watched over 53 nights of darkness. The same stars that had seen Clara scratch marks into a wooden beam with bleeding fingers. But she wasn't counting anymore. The music swelled. The lanterns glowed. The whole town spun around them in a blur of color and laughter. And somewhere in a federal prison, 200 miles away, Silas Whitfield sat alone in his cell, staring at the wall. He had started scratching marks into the stone. One for each day. Counting. Waiting. Just like his daughter had. The difference was, Clara had stopped counting. She had found something better to do with her time. She had learned how to live. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment and tell me what part of the story stayed with you. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Every story we share is told with care, and every image you see is created to bring these emotions to life. Some people spend their whole lives counting days in the darkness, waiting for someone to open the door. But the truth is, the key was always in their hands. Clara Mae Whitfield stopped waiting. She stopped counting. She stopped surviving. And she started living. That's not weakness. That's not luck. That's the kind of strength that changes everything. The door is open now. Walk through it. Walk through.